is a
Hello.
pleasure to see you and to talk to you from Berlin to Budapest on the topic of academic freedom. I would just like to say that I think this is a very broad topic, and there is a wide range of different phenomena of different violations of academic freedom, which should be distinguished, I think. And I think from a Hungarian perspective, you have maybe very different phenomena in mind than I have from a German or from a German perspective, or from the perspective of an institute, Wissenschaftskolleg zu Berlin, where we have about 40 fellows from all over the world each year. And so we are confronting very, very different issues of academic or threats to academic freedom, let's say from fellows from Syria or from Egypt on the one hand, over, let's say, fellows from Hungary and Poland within the EU, on the other hand, to, let's say, fellows from the US who face completely different problems and threats to academic freedom. So as the series we are talking in is called Hungary and Beyond, I think it would be interesting to hear from you what the specific situation in Hungary, the current situation in Hungary is like.
Hello, Barbara. It's nice to talk to you about these topics. And I agree that we are facing some very different issues, but I also think there are some issues around universities, higher education and research we might share. And that's why it's so interesting to try and discuss some of these. So first, let me give you a very, very quick survey of what's been going on in Hungary in the past 10 years. In this period, we've seen several attacks on academic freedom in Hungary, from hostile rhetorics and propaganda to actual administrative measures. And some of these attacks were ideological or had an ideological pretext, such as the calling out of gender studies as something in contradiction with traditional Christian values, which led to the banning of gender studies degree courses. And also maybe the most well-known example was the banishing of the Central European University from Budapest, a university which is known to promote the idea of open society. But also we've seen the creation of new research institutes, overfunded institutes which are not supposed to take part in an international academic exchange, their sole purpose being to research different aspects of national identity in Hungarian history and culture. And recently, I think that a new chapter has been opened in this government's higher education and research policy. This one does not refer to ideological pretexts. What we've seen is a constant effort to subjugate higher education and research institutions to government power or to the under the rule of Orbán and his small circle. This is what happened to the network of research institutions of the Hungarian Academy of Sciences. And most recently, this is what's happening to state-owned universities. More than 15 universities are affected now. And what happens here is that a fund is created with board members being appointed by this government. Board members include some academics, politicians, representatives of the industry, most of them 100% loyal to Orbán's government, and they are appointed for a lifetime. So this means that these boards loyal to Orbán will decide about public funding, European Union funding for higher education for a very long period. And so I said that there is no ideological explanation for these changes. Rather, it is often quoted that the reason for these changes is that Hungarian universities are doing very badly in international university rankings. They have very low positions. So it is said that these changes are needed to boost universities' performance and make them competitive in the international field. But it is all too obvious that these changes are part of Orbán's master plan to secure his long-term administrative and political power, even beyond the next elections, in case he happens to lose those. So what I'm trying to point out is that it is sadly ironic that an international measurement system, university rankings, which is supposed to secure the objective comparison of universities around the globe, is used here in Hungary as a pretext to subjugate universities.
Yeah, this is fairly obvious, as the CEU was as far as I know, the best performing Hungarian university. And so obviously it's a pretext to boost quality of university research. Do you think, what about the difference between the humanities and the natural and social sciences? Do you observe a certain a dismissive attitude towards the humanities, specifically the humanities, whereas other disciplines like natural sciences, engineering, and so on would be fostered?
Yes, and I think this is one point where the Hungarian and the international tendency seem to be parallel, because there is a growing respect for hard sciences, technological studies, and a diminishing respect for the humanities, which is, I think, at least in Hungary, but maybe not only in Hungary, is also a sign of the control of critical thinking. So I think that not only in Hungary we see signs of this new vision of the university, whose main task is to provide skills that are in demand in the job markets, and teachers should boost their the publication lists and citation are required to teach these skills, and universities less and less seen as a place for open debate, which I think is a very worrying tendency. Do you see anything similar in Germany?
Yeah. It is funny because what I'm observing in Germany, but even more, I think, in the US, is exactly the opposite problem, namely that the politicization of the universities is increasing, and the political polarization which we are facing is entering the universities and is also a problem. What I think should be distinguished carefully, although it's overlapping, is the difference between academic freedom on the one hand and intellectual freedom of speech in general on the other hand. Because and the question is, who is threatening these freedom rights? And I think in your case, it's obvious in Hungary that the threats come from the state authorities, and these threats are directed against academic freedom and also against the freedom of speech in general, but especially against academic freedom as a kind of cooperative autonomy of academic institutions. Whereas in Germany and also in the US, there is at least the complaint of certain groups to say that intellectual freedom of speech in general is being made impossible in the universities. And they claim that there is a kind of leftist dictatorship of opinion in the universities. But this threat, if it is really existing, and I would, it is, I would doubt it to a certain extent. This threat comes more from within the universities, from, for example, the students who don't want, let's say, racist or right-wing opinions or sexist opinions being stated within the universities. So what we are observing, I think, is a growing political polarization in general of the whole society, and this polarization reaches the universities, and depending on which political camp you belong to, you would see this as a very serious threat, or you would maybe doubt that it is really a threat. But I think the problem is, in Germany at least, that I think the autonomy of the universities of being, to a certain extent, not politicized space should be defended. Yeah? Freedom of opinion means you can state whatever you want, even talk nonsense if you want, whereas academic freedom of the university and academic institutions means you can speak in, you can state whatever you want in the limits of certain academic standards, academic methodologies, and so on. So I think these two concepts of freedom should be distinguished. They usually overlap, of course, yeah, but there are cases where they can also contradict each other, and so I think we should keep this more carefully apart. In your case, in Hungary, I think it is, I mean, both kinds of freedom are under attack, whereas in Germany, at least, academic freedom is not threatened by state authorities. Yeah, they defend the space of academic, the autonomy of academia, whereas threats come from more or less from within, or from the society, but not from state authorities themselves. And so this is, I think, a very serious difference, and makes the situation in Hungary much more serious and much more dangerous than it is in Germany or in the US.
Yes, I'm afraid you're right about this. But at the same time, I think there's one thing that connects the two problems, and that is whether we want to see universities as places for open debate, spaces that are that encourage the clash of different viewpoints, different ideas, and whether we allow politics within the walls of universities, not in the sense that we want to dictate what is sayable and what is not, but to encourage debate, to help students experience this excitement of debate, that yes, they might meet ideas they don't like at all, and still they have to tolerate those views and ideas, and they have to find a reasoning debate or not. And I think that both administrative control over universities and things like cancel culture, as it's often called, they have this in common, that they seem to be afraid of universities as open spaces of free debate, and that's really worrying, I think, in both in the West and in authoritarian countries, as Hungary has become.
Yes, I mean, in general, I would agree, and I think it is there are threats, so to speak, from the left and from the right, of course, but I think the threats are not symmetrical. Yeah, I think, I mean, I'm also of the opinion that we should defend the right of any political camp with certain limits, of course. I mean, you should not have a Holocaust denier in the university, and should not allow him or her to speak out. But within these very broad limits, everything should be possible, and there should be rules of polite discourse, and within these rules, every statement, more or less every statement, should be possible. But on the other hand, I think the threats to this freedom of discourse are not symmetrical. I mean, the threat that comes from what one might call political correctness. I mean, I wouldn't deny this threat. I see the problem, but it is not as dangerous to academic freedom than threats by state authorities who try to delete this space of discourse.
Yes, I absolutely agree. All the more because the Hungarian government or journalists in line with their ideology often refer to or like to flaunt Hungary as the last bastion of free speech, exactly because political correctness has no roots in Hungarian public discourse, and I think it's very important to point out the difference of protecting the rights of minorities, protecting their rights of identity formation, and creating a space that is encouraging for minority self declaration, and at the same time that encourages free debate and the clash of opinions. Because in Hungary, when it is said that this is the last bastion of free speech, of course it is often meant as the protection of hate speech, as the protection of racism, and never as the protection of opinions that are opposed to theirs. So yes, I think it's very important to make a difference between the administrative conditions of academic freedom or free speech. We are not discussing media now, but of course there are very similar tendencies in media as well. And then to discuss the possibilities of creating these open spaces of debate within a free administrative system of conditions. Yes. So I agree that there is a huge difference in this, but I also think that certain recent tendencies in our vision of the university has made it easy for authoritarian regimes to occupy universities. So for example, I think there is it is more and more popular to think of universities as these over-regulated technocratic places which only offer skills and meet certain administrative criteria, and which are not places for open debate. And this idea of the university is something that assists authoritarian governments to occupy universities.
Yeah. And I think the tragic thing about this general tendency and this polarizing atmosphere in the society in general or worldwide is that both camps reinforce one another increasingly. That the Orban adherents feel reassured in their position, pointing at these tendencies of what they call left-wing dictatorship and so on, and vice versa. So both, and this is what polarization really means. Both tendencies reinforce each other mutually. And this is, I think, the very tragic thing about this whole development. I would like, if you allow, to change the direction a little bit, I would like to ask you, from a German point of view, how could we, in Germany, but also in other European countries, support you in Hungary, but also in Poland, or let's say Turkey, even worse, of course, to support you in your fight against these attacks against academic freedom? What could we do? Because, I mean, I should say that we, as the Wissenschaftskolleg, especially as an institute, which has this concern and wants to support you, we had the experience that if we tried, I mean, there are many programs now in all over the world to help scholars in exile and to fund them and so on, to support them. But on the other hand, especially Hungarian colleagues told me that this is, at least for Hungarians, other colleagues in Europe, the wrong way, because it increases the ongoing brain drain from these countries. So you leave Hungary, Poland, Turkey, whatever, and you all end up in the US in the end, or in the UK.
Yes, that's a very serious problem, as far as I know. In elite secondary schools, gymnasiums, 30% of students, or even more, never ever enter Hungarian higher education. Right after graduation, they leave Hungary and they, thank you very much, they don't want to go to university here. Which is, I mean, it's okay if young people go to study abroad. The problem is if they never return and never invest their expertise into Hungarian industry and culture. But still, I think all kinds of support are very welcome. And I hope this won't sound rude, I think we are a bit disenchanted now with symbolical gestures of support. Of course, it's great if you circulate a petition and see big names in the Western academic world signing it, or it was a very touching example when the University of Drama and Film Studies suffered this occupation. There was this outburst of international solidarity, which was really, really beautiful. But I think these mean mainly moral support and not actual support that can be turned into practice. And of course, we constantly try to find support in the European Union. And let me tell you this funny story. I'm part of an organization called the Network of Academics, and this network prepared a report on the Orbán government's crackdown on education, culture, and so on and so forth. So we wrote this report and went, a small delegation, including me, went to the European Parliament, trying to find support for our cause. And then we spoke to several members of Parliament, and most of them said, oh yes, it's so important you wrote this down, and thank you very much, and you have all our sympathy. And then one of the MPs said that, oh yeah, well, yes, this is all too bad, but why don't you elect another government? And you know, it was frustrating, it was irritating, but at the same time, I think it did have a point. Until there is no consensus in Hungary, even among the academia, about the minimum criteria of academic freedom. Until there's no solidarity between Hungarian higher education and research institutions, and they don't stand up for each other, it's very difficult to expect the European, or it's not difficult, but it doesn't make too much sense to expect foreign intervention, and these will be only, you know, these gestures of solidarity. I don't know whether there is will or there are measures in the European Union to intervene somehow into this situation. I think the problem is broader, and I think even in Europe there is no consensus about what counts as a free academic institution. So I think that, of course, debates are very important, gestures of support are very important, but this will have to be sorted out somehow in Hungary.
I mean, this is sad, of course, but don't you, I mean, we cannot do much more than trying to always raise international awareness of the problem and demonstrating you in Hungary, in Poland, and so on, that you are not alone in your fight against these attacks. But I mean, I was one, and there are, of course, there is networking, there are conferences on the topic and whatever to raise awareness in other countries, and to maybe impose a little bit more pressure on our politicians who, for example, within the EPP, the German Christian Democrats, who played a very ambiguous role or doubtful role in
letting Orbán happen.
Yes, yes, the relationship between EPP and Fidesz. Yes, and now they are out, but voluntarily. But I was wondering if it might be possible to support initiatives in Hungary, in Poland, and other countries of colleagues who lost their jobs for political reasons, to give them a certain funding in the respective countries, and not encouraging them to leave their country, but funding, for example, blogs in the internet, whatever, even some kind of private colleges or something like that, which exists beside the official universities and so on. Can you imagine kind of measures to do that?
Yes, I think so. Yeah, I have to say that I think the only organization where people lost their jobs because of their political views so far is this University of Theatre and Film, and they did not lose their jobs because they were fired. They lost their jobs because they were autonomous enough to say that no, we are not going on with this institution, whose leaders were imposed on us and created this free space of learning, which I'm sure needs a lot of moral and financial support. But yes, but I think we can't say that in Hungary it's a tendency that academics are fired because of their views. It's not the case, but I think there is a growing need of creating alternative teaching spaces, alternative independent organizations of teaching and adult education, not only because of the government's measures, but also I think this is a worldwide phenomenon that there is a kind of a need of new ways or new types of organizations for teaching and learning. And of course, in a democratic country, those are a lot easier to form than in Hungary. But let me ask you something. What do you think would happen in Germany if, for example, someone was fired for their views on, for example, sexual minorities?
I think that would cause a huge public protest. I think so. I mean, we have we have very few examples where conferences were cancelled, for example, or public events were cancelled because of certain political statements of participants. But these are very few examples, and usually the public sphere is open enough to discuss this, and the media is so. I mean, you can discuss all of this. The problem I see in Germany is more that you have a kind of internal censorship. Yeah.
Yes.
That you are very careful not to make certain statements, and this restricts the scope of the political debate to a certain extent. But yeah, compared to Hungary, it's of course much less serious. But we should be aware of the danger in advance, and we should not be we should not feel all too comfortable and too secure. And I think,
what I'm wondering whether solidarity between research and higher education institutions goes without saying in Germany, or because in Hungary that's a huge problem, I think, and that's my mania, that the lack of solidarity is what makes these institutions so prone to all these interventions.
I mean, I would say solidarity in Germany does not include all political camps. I mean, solidarity is also a matter of political belonging, so to speak. And this is one of the many consequences of what I call political polarization. So if someone is being cancelled because of, let's say, Islamophobic statements, he would experience solidarity only from one camp, and vice versa. So this is the problem. And everyone who tries to express a more intermediate position or more moderate position, or tries to moderate the debate, would be put to one of the two camps. I mean, this is the problem. You cannot keep so to speak, a neutral common space, shared space of debate, but you would be very easily put into one direction.
I know what you're speaking about, and I think this is a very important experience for Hungary too, because if ever this government will be replaced, then the whole country will have to be reconstructed, rebuilt, and I think the only way there is through open debate. And I know that it seems, for now, it seems almost impossible that this divided country can sit down together, and divided intelligentsia have debates based on goodwill and open-mindedness. So I think, I know it's a different situation, but this kind of political division is something that makes creating a shared public space very difficult, and maybe that's a bit similar to what's going on in Western countries as far as political division is concerned.
Do you think that if any institution might provide the forum or the space for a less politicized debate, this might be the universities? I mean, which other institution would be able to provide this space? Or would you say the universities, the academia in general, is as politically polarized as the whole society in Hungary?
Well, I think some of them are, and others are just afraid of debate. But I very strongly hope that, yes, I think universities should play a pioneering role in recreating this public sphere or public space where genuine debates can be restarted. So I think that could be a very important role of the universities.
Maybe this is a little bit of an optimistic last word.
Okay, then why not be optimistic? Thank you very much.
Okay,
It's been lovely to talk to you.
Bye bye. Bye bye, Anna.